Welcome to No Compromises, a peek into the mind of two old web devs who have seen some things. This is Joel.
And this is Aaron. So I don't know about you, but I've been in a place before where I've been programming and came across some sort of challenge or a bug where I couldn't seem to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And you're writing the same thing in your application, and it's just like, how is this going to work, or why isn't this working? I honestly, probably the number one area it's happened to me in the past has been like with either JavaScript or CSS,
Okay.
where I'm looking at something and I'm trying to write some CSS, and I've done my work, I know how it works, but every time I go and like put something in, it's just not working as I expect.
Yeah, I might call that you're stuck. Like you tried a few things and like you reach a certain point, you're just kind of spinning your wheels. You're like, this isn't helping anymore.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've talked before, there's a number of different ways you can talk to your team, and you can, do some research online or whatever. But there's a technique that I do that I've shown a lot of people that, well, as soon as I explain it to you, you'll be like, oh, yeah, duh. But it's really hard to catch it in the moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this idea basically is to take out your challenging code and start fresh in something brand new. So basically, you're pulling out the challenging part, or the part you're stuck on, from the main project, and kind of remaking it or duplicating it in something that's fresh, brand new, that has no legacy around it, that has nothing going on, so that there aren't other things affecting it.
Okay.
So, for example, let's just say you were trying to, I don't know, style some sort of input box or something, and things aren't, it's not styling right. Well, the first thing I usually do when I get stuck there and I'm like, I just can't figure it out, is I'll go and I'll make a brand new HTML file. I'll put maybe the basics, like if we're using something like Bootstrap or something, and maybe I might import Bootstrap, maybe.
Yep.
And then I'll make an input box, maybe with the surrounding label, if that's part of the issue or not. And then I'll start writing the CSS. So basically, there's a couple lines of code. There's really nothing else in the way. And I start to build this out and say, like, oh, do I really understand what I'm doing? Is there is what I'm writing actually real? Like, is it, or am I writing it wrong, or is it something else in the application that's affecting it?
So there wouldn't even be like Webpack or Vite or whatever you're using. So it's literally just like I'm going to pull in the CDN script and I'm going to do like the simplest thing to make sure that I'm at least my assumptions are correct in the basic thing I'm trying to do.
Yeah. Because I found a couple times you run into one of two things. Either one, the first one, usually, hopefully, the best solution is, oh, you don't actually know what you're doing, so it has nothing to do with the rest of the application. It's you just haven't figured out how to do this yet. And so when you're in this very simple place, there's nothing else that could possibly be affecting it. Because I don't know. I've taken on many different legacy applications, and when you start working on something, you're like, oh, I'm making an input box. Why is it suddenly bold? And you're like, oh, well, I got to track this down 7 layers into different imported CSS files and stuff. You're like, I don't know. And so when you start over fresh and new, you can kind of say, like, oh, I do know how to style this input box. It must be something in the application. Or no, I don't know how to style this input box. So that's basically being the first thing, is like, oh, do you know what you're actually trying to do? Like, have you figured out how to do it?
Yeah.
And then the second thing is, you might figure out, well, there's something in the context of the application that I have. And so that kind of goes down the route of, basically, then I'll start to try to remove everything I possibly can from the current application.
So now you're back
adding things back in.
You're back in the real application. You're trying to it's like process of elimination. Like, when does this thing start working? Like, when I remove these 10 other things on the page. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I'll basically try to bring in what I've just done into the normal application. So if it's like a huge blade file or something like that, I might just delete everything in there, just temporarily, of course. Thank you, Git. And just put in my little bit of code there that I wrote. Maybe it's HTML, and see, does existing CSS affect it or not?
Yeah.
And then kind of go that process.
Yeah, that makes sense. In fact, I kind of remember doing that with you recently, where you had built something and then I was like working on getting it up in a prod-like environment to demo. And it wasn't working like this. I think it was the CSS or the JavaScript, like wasn't even building. Like running prod was failing with some weird error. And so we did that and we figured it out. We did it locally and we kind of eliminated things one at a time. And it was a pretty useful exercise because at the start of it, we're like, I know something's breaking it. I just don't know what it is. And it was
Right.
something weird, as I recall, but we figured it out that way.
Well, and let me make sure I clarify that. You kind of said it one way, and I think my point is there's ways to do it a different way. You said
Mhm.
I started eliminating things one at a time.
Yeah.
I'm actually preaching starting a little bit differently, saying start from nothing and
Right.
add things one at a time.
Oh,
So
okay.
there's two different processes there because
Yeah.
you can get stuck, like, oh well, if I remove this, whatever. So when I talked about removing stuff from the blade file, that's not where I went first. I started out with a brand new plain
Yeah.
HTML file, found out I know what I can do in this clean environment. Now
Right.
I'm going to remove everything I possibly can in order to still get the app to load barely and start adding things in there.
Yeah, I think in the case I gave that example, because it was like a build issue, you couldn't like just start with an empty thing. Like in this one particular context, it was the combination of things. So we had to go the other direction. But yeah, I like that idea because otherwise you might be in a dead end, right? Like if you're assuming this thing should work this way and it's not working that way, and then you're like, oh, maybe it's some other related thing in this project, and you go down that path. It's like, no, your initial assumption was wrong. You need to figure that out and kind of doing it in a clean slate. Seems like a nice way to try that.
There's another example I ran into recently with a friend who's working on a product, and they're having an issue sort of getting something to work. Had to do with mobile and various different things, and it can be a tough situation to kind of test out locally. And so
Sure.
basically,
Yeah.
there was this idea that you could only do this. We could write it and we could push it to prod and see how it works. And I don't know. That's nope. Don't do
I,
that.
oh, that
Yeah.
sounds like the approach you'd love, Aaron.
Right. So, the other suggestion I had is like, do you really need to go and add this to your mobile app that, thousands and thousands of people are going to be using?
Right.
Or could you basically copy the app or even make a brand new one and add in this little bit of technology you're trying to figure out? Let's just say it's NFC reading or something.
Mhm.
And you put it in this brand new app. You don't have to even release it in the app store unless it really depends on it or whatever.
Yeah.
You use Test Flight or something like that
Sure.
and make a brand new thing where like there's a button that says do this thing. And so you press the button, it does that thing, and then you can push that out and test it on phones and see, does this make sense? And at least then you can remove at least some of the steps of having to get that, just testing it in production.
Yeah. So that kind of has the initial benefit we talked about with the first example, where you're doing it in isolation and you can really focus on the thing you're trying to test. But it has the added benefit of not messing with real users, right? Like you're
Mhm.
not. So it's
Right.
kind of like another reason to do this approach is, yeah, maybe don't push this to prod and like potentially break or break something for somebody else or make the user experience worse or whatever. So
Yeah.
yeah, makes a lot of sense.
So I think the summary of this is like the next time you kind of get stuck on something, yeah, you can kind of, work it in the current environment that you're in, maybe remove a thing or two. But if you're
Mhm.
still stuck, maybe start from the other direction and build up instead of tearing down.
I like it.
So I don't know what what the deal is, but I have experience of people telling me that I don't know what I'm talking about. And it has a lot it has really nothing to do with technical stuff and more just in life, right?
Mhm.
And so I grew up in northern Wisconsin, and there's a town there called Okano. And then around where I am now, which is the Milwaukee area, there's another place called Oconomowoc. And one of the things I would do is Okano's very small, right? And so I would talk to people, and I'm like, we're living in Wisconsin. They're like, oh yeah, so am I. And I'm like, oh well, I'm from Okano. And they would say, oh, do you mean Oconomowoc?
Yep.
I was like, what are you talking about? No,
Uh-huh.
I know where I'm from.
Mhm.
Like, why would you tell me I don't know what I'm talking about?
Maybe it's like, the a local pronunciation versus an outsider, like Nolans instead of New Orleans, and they thought maybe if you live in Oconomowoc, you just shorten it to Oconto. No?
That's yeah, I've been to places. Well, I mean, yeah, that name was always fun too, because I remember I was
Mhm.
at a conference once when I was really young, and they announced me. They're like, "Oh, Aaron," or I don't know. I think they might have said my name. I wasn't paying attention. And they're like, "From Osanto."
The
I was
C
like,
is
Yeah, and I'm just sitting there
yeah.
like not paying. They're like, "Aaron," calling again, Aaron from Osanto. I'm like,
Mhm.
"Oh, do they mean Okanto?" But one of the other things is I'm allergic to pork,
Mm.
and it's it's pretty rare. And so I've had to deal with a lot of that stuff. And so I've told people too, like, oh, I don't eat pork. And the number one response to that is, oh, are you sure you're not Jewish?
What?
Well, like, what? Like I know for a fact I'm not.
That's one of the founding principles of Judaism is having to be allergic to pork. Wow. Yeah, I can see how that'd be a little annoying, Aaron. I sympathize with you.
Yeah, so I think that's why I think I've turned into a grumpy old man now, and it's like, don't tell me what I'll tell you what. Have you tried following our advice and you're still stuck though?
We don't want you to suffer alone. You can contact us for help on our website, nocompromises.io. Click the button to book a call, and we'll see how we can get you unstuck.